Sarah Mackenzie woke up before the sun every morning. The old rooster outside her window did not need to crow. Her body knew when it was time to start working. She rolled out of bed and pulled on her worn jeans and boots. The same boots she had been wearing for 3 years now. The leather was cracked and the soles were thin, but they still did their job. She walked to the kitchen and made coffee in the old pot that belonged to her grandmother. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been this way for 2 years now, ever since the accident. Sarah tried not to think about that night when the police came to her door. She tried not to remember the words they said about her parents and the truck that ran the red light. The coffee was strong and bitter, just how her father used to make it. Sarah drank it black and looked out the window at her land. 200 acres of the best wheat fields in Montana. Her great-grandfather had bought this land in 1952 with money he saved from working in the copper mines. Her grandfather had worked it his whole life. Her father had done the same. Now it was her turn. Sarah was only 17, but she felt much older. She had been working this farm since she was 12. Her hands were hard and rough from years of fixing fences, driving tractors, and pulling weeds. Most girls her age worried about prom dresses and dating. Sarah worried about crop prices and weather reports. She finished her coffee and walked outside. The morning air was cool and fresh. She could smell the wheat growing in the fields. The plants were tall and green, swaying in the gentle breeze. In a few weeks they would turn golden and be ready for harvest. This crop would pay her bills for the whole year. It had to. She had no other choice. Sarah walked to the barn where she kept her equipment. The building was old but solid. Her grandfather had built it with his own hands. Inside, she checked on her tractor. It was older than she was, but she knew how to fix anything that broke. Her father had taught her well. He always said that a farmer who could not fix her own equipment would not survive long. She climbed onto the tractor and started the engine. It coughed and sputtered for a moment, then settled into a steady rumble. Sarah smiled. The old machine still had life in it. She drove out to the fields to check on her crop. The wheat was growing well. The rains had come at the right time this year. The plants looked healthy and strong. As she drove through the rows, Sarah thought about her parents. They would be proud of what she had accomplished. After they died, everyone said she should sell the farm. They said a teenage girl could not run a place this big by herself. They said she should move to town and live with relatives, but Sarah knew better. This land was in her blood. She could not leave it. The first year after the accident was the hardest. Sarah had to learn things her parents had never taught her. She had to figure out crop insurance and bank loans. She had to negotiate with grain buyers and equipment dealers. Many people tried to cheat her because she was young and alone. But Sarah was smart and stubborn. She learned fast. She also learned who her real friends were. Some neighbors helped her when she needed it most. Old Mr. Peterson next door came over to help with the harvest that first year. Mrs. Chen from town taught her how to keep the farm's books. The mechanic at Johnson's garage showed her how to fix the tractor when it broke down. These people became like family to her, but not everyone was kind. Some people in town looked at her with pity in their eyes. They whispered about the poor orphan girl who was trying to do a man's job. Others saw her farm as an opportunity. They thought a young girl would be easy to push around. They thought wrong. Sarah finished checking the fields and drove back to the barn. She had work to do. The fence in the south pasture needed fixing. Some of the posts were loose after the last storm. She loaded her tools into the truck and drove out to fix them. This was the kind of work that never ended on a farm. Something always needed fixing or replacing. As she worked on the fence, Sarah thought about her future. She wanted to expand the farm someday. Maybe buy the Peterson place when old Mr. Peterson retired. She had big dreams, but she knew they would take time and hard work. She was willing to do both. The sun was getting hot now. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at her work. The fence was solid again. She packed up her tools and drove back to the house for lunch. She made a simple sandwich and ate it on the porch, looking out at her fields. This was her favorite time of day. The work was half done, and the afternoon stretched ahead of her. The wheat moved like ocean waves in the breeze. The sky was clear and blue. Everything was peaceful and quiet. This was why she stayed. This was why she fought to keep the farm. This land was not just her home. It was part of who she was. After lunch, Sarah went back to work. She checked the irrigation system and fixed a broken sprinkler head. She greased the bearings on the combine harvester. She cleaned out the grain bins to get ready for harvest. Every task was important. Every job had to be done right. As the sun began to set, Sarah finally stopped working. She was tired but satisfied. The farm was in good shape. The wheat was growing well. In a few weeks, she would harvest the crop and sell it. The money would pay her bills and maybe leave enough to buy some new equipment. Sarah made dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table. The house felt empty, but she was used to it now. After dinner, she sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The night was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant call of an owl. She thought about tomorrow. There would be more work to do. There always was. But Sarah did not mind. This was her life, and she had chosen it. She was proud of what she had built here. She was proud to carry on her family's legacy. The farm would survive, and so would she. Sarah went to bed early, as she always did. Tomorrow would start before dawn, just like today. But she was ready for it. She had been ready for 2 years now. The land was her responsibility, and she would not let it down. Sarah first noticed the stairs at the grocery store. She was buying supplies for the farm when she heard the whispers behind her. 3 boys from her high school were standing by the candy aisle, pointing at her and laughing. Jake Morrison was the tallest one. His younger brother Tommy stood next to him. Their friend Derek Walsh was with them too. "Look at Dirt Girl," Jake said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Still wearing the same old clothes." Sarah ignored them and kept shopping. She had learned to ignore a lot of things since her parents died. But the boys did not stop. They followed her through the store, making comments about her worn jeans and muddy boots. They called her names that made other shoppers stare. "Hey, Sarah," Tommy called out. "When are you going to give up playing farmer and get a real job?" Sarah turned around and looked at them. "When are you going to grow up and get any job?" she said quietly. The boys laughed, but not in a friendly way. Jake stepped closer to her. He was bigger than Sarah and older by a year. His family owned the largest ranch in the county. His father was rich and powerful. Jake thought that made him special. "You think you're tough," Jake said. "But everyone knows you can't keep that farm going much longer." Sarah finished her shopping and left the store, but the boys did not leave her alone. Over the next few weeks, they seemed to be everywhere she went. At the gas station, they would pull up next to her truck and rev their engines. At the diner, they would sit at the table behind her and make jokes about her appearance. The worst part was at school. Sarah still had to finish her senior year, even though she was running a farm. The boys were in some of her classes. They would pass notes about her. They would accidentally bump into her in the hallways. They made her life miserable in small ways that teachers never seemed to notice. "Why don't you just sell that old farm?" Derek asked her one day after math class. "You could move to the city and be normal." "This is normal for me," Sarah replied. "Some of us have real responsibilities." Jake overheard and walked over. "Responsibilities? You call playing in the dirt a responsibility?" "I call feeding people a responsibility," Sarah said. "Something you might understand if you ever did anything useful." Jake's face turned red. He was not used to people talking back to him. Most kids at school were afraid of him. His family had money and influence. His father owned half the businesses in town, but Sarah was not afraid. The harassment got worse after that. Someone put dirt in Sarah's locker. Her truck tires were let down twice in the school parking lot. Someone spray-painted Dirt Girl on her mailbox at home. Sarah cleaned it off and said nothing to anyone. But the real trouble started when Jake's father made an offer on Sarah's farm. Mr. Morrison came to her house one evening with papers in his hand. He was a big man with expensive clothes and a fancy truck. He smiled when he talked, but his eyes were cold. "Sarah, I know this farm is too much for you to handle alone," he said. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer. You could buy a nice house in town and still have money left over." Sarah looked at the papers he handed her. The offer was for much less than the farm was worth. "Thank you, but I'm not interested in selling," she said. Mr. Morrison's smile faded. "You should think about this carefully. Farming is a hard business. Many things can go wrong. It would be safer for you to take my offer." "I said no thank you," Sarah repeated. Mr. Morrison's face got hard. "You're making a mistake, young lady. This offer won't stay on the table forever." After he left, Sarah felt uneasy. There was something threatening in his voice. She knew the Morrison family wanted her land to expand their cattle operation. They had been buying up small farms for years, but Sarah would not sell. This was her home. The next day at school, Jake approached her at lunch. "My dad made you a fair offer," he said. "You should take it." "That's between me and your father," Sarah said. "No, it's between you and all of us," Jake said. Tommy and Derek were standing behind him now. "We don't want some little girl embarrassing our town by failing at farming." "I'm not failing at anything," Sarah said. "Yet," Jake said with a mean smile. "But you will." From that day on, the harassment became constant. The boys would drive by her farm at night, honking their horns and shouting. They would follow her truck when she went to town. They made her feel like she was always being watched. Sarah tried to focus on her work. The wheat was growing well. Harvest time was only a few weeks away. If she could just get through the next month, she would have enough money to pay her bills and keep the farm going for another year. But the boys had other plans. They started spreading rumors around town. They said Sarah was going crazy living alone on the farm. They said she was failing her classes at school. They said she was too proud to accept help when she needed it. Some people believed the rumors. Sarah noticed that fewer people waved at her when she drove through town. Some store clerks were less friendly than before. It felt like the whole community was turning against her. One evening, Sarah was working late in the barn when she heard motorcycles outside. She looked through the window and saw 3 bikes parked in her driveway. Jake, Tommy, and Derek were standing next to them, looking at her house. Sarah grabbed a wrench and walked outside. "You're on private property," she said. "Just thought we'd stop by and see how you're doing," Jake said. "Living all alone out here must be scary." "I'm not scared of anything," Sarah said. "Maybe you should be," Derek said. The boys got back on their motorcycles and rode away, but not before Jake called out, "Think about my dad's offer, Sarah. It's the smart thing to do." After they left, Sarah walked around her property to make sure nothing was damaged. Everything looked normal, but she felt violated. These boys thought they could intimidate her into giving up her farm. They thought she was weak because she was young and alone. They were wrong. Sarah had been through worse than this. She had buried her parents and kept the farm going when everyone said it was impossible. She had worked 18-hour days and learned to do jobs that grown men struggled with. She was not going to be scared away by 3 spoiled boys who had never worked hard for anything in their lives. But as Sarah locked her doors that night, she knew this was just the beginning. The Morrison family wanted her land, and they were not going to give up easily. Jake and his friends were just the first wave. There would be more pressure to come. Sarah checked the locks twice and made sure all the windows were secure. She had a feeling that things were going to get much worse before they got better. But she was ready for whatever came next. This was her land, and she would fight to keep it. Sarah woke up to a strange orange glow coming through her bedroom window. At first she thought it was the sunrise, but it was the middle of the night, and the light was too bright and too close. She sat up in bed and looked outside. Her heart stopped. Her wheat field was on fire. Sarah jumped out of bed and ran outside in her pajamas and bare feet. The heat hit her face like a wall. Flames were dancing across her entire crop, turning months of hard work into ash and smoke. The fire was huge and growing bigger by the minute. She ran back inside and called the fire department. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. "There's a fire at the Mackenzie farm on County Road 15, she told the operator. "My whole field is burning." "We'll be right there," the woman said. "Stay away from the fire and wait for us outside." Sarah hung up and ran back outside. The flames were moving fast, eating up everything in their path. The wheat she had planted in the spring was almost ready for harvest. In just a few weeks, she would have cut it down and sold it. Now it was all being destroyed. She stood in her yard and watched helplessly as her future went up in smoke. Then, fire was so bright it lit up the whole night sky. She could hear it crackling and roaring like a living thing. The smell of burning wheat filled the air. Then she saw them. 3 dark shapes on motorcycles at the edge of her property. They were sitting there watching the fire burn. Even in the darkness, Sarah could tell who they were. She recognized the sound of Jake Morrison's motorcycle. It had a special exhaust pipe that made it louder than the others. The 3 boys sat there for a few more minutes, watching her crop burn. Then they started their engines and rode away into the night. There, headlights disappeared down the dirt road that led back to town. Sarah wanted to run after them, but she was barefoot, and they were already gone. Besides, she had to stay and deal with the fire. But she knew who had done this. She knew why they had done it. And she would never forget what she had seen. The fire trucks arrived 20 minutes later. By then, most of her crop was already destroyed. The firefighters worked hard to put out the flames, but there was not much they could save. Sarah stood in her yard and watched them spray water on the burning field. "How did this start?" asked the fire chief. His name was Bob Martinez, and Sarah had known him since she was little. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I woke up and saw the flames. Was anyone else around? Did you see any vehicles or people?" Sarah hesitated. She had seen the 3 boys on their motorcycles, but she had no proof they started the fire. "I might have seen some motorcycles leaving," she said carefully. Bob wrote this down in his notebook. "We'll investigate," he said. "But fires like this can start from many things. A cigarette, a spark from a car engine, even lightning." Sarah nodded, but she knew this was not an accident. The fire had started in 3 different places at the same time. That meant someone had set it on purpose. Someone who wanted to destroy her crop and force her to sell her farm. It took the firefighters 2 hours to put out all the flames. When they were done, Sarah walked out into what was left of her field. The ground was black and smoking. The wheat, that had been green and tall that morning, was now just ash and burnt stubble. The smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Bob said as he packed up his equipment. "I know how much this crop meant to you." Sarah nodded, but could not speak. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she would start crying and never stop. This crop was supposed to pay her bills for the whole year. Without it, she might lose the farm after all. The fire trucks left, and Sarah was alone with the destruction. She sat down in the dirt and finally let herself cry. All her hard work was gone. All her plans for the future were ruined. She had planted this wheat in the spring with such hope. She had watched it grow all summer, dreaming about harvest time. Now there would be no harvest. As the sun came up, Sarah could see the full extent of the damage. Nearly all of her 200 acres of wheat were destroyed. Only a small section at the far end of the field had been saved. It was not enough to matter. She had lost everything. Sarah went back to the house and called her insurance company. She explained what had happened and asked about filing a claim. The woman on the phone was polite, but not encouraging. "We'll need to send an investigator," she said. "If the fire was set deliberately, we might not be able to pay the claim." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "If someone burned your crop on purpose, that's arson. We don't cover criminal acts unless you can prove you weren't involved." Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. "You think I burned my own crop?" "We have to investigate all possibilities," the woman said. "We'll be in touch." Sarah hung up the phone and sat at her kitchen table. She felt numb and empty. Not only had she lost her crop, but now the insurance company might not pay her anything. Without that money, she would definitely lose the farm. She thought about the boys on the motorcycles. She was sure they had started the fire, but how could she prove it? She had seen them in the dark from far away. A court would never convict anyone based on that. Sarah spent the rest of the day walking through her burnt field. She picked up pieces of charred wheat and crumbled them in her hands. This had been her life's work. Her parents had taught her to farm this land. Her grandfather had worked these same fields. Now it was all destroyed. That evening, Sarah drove into town to buy groceries. She needed to eat something, even though she had no appetite. At the store, she saw Jake Morrison and his friends hanging around the parking lot. They were laughing and joking like nothing had happened. When Jake saw her, he walked over to her truck. "Hey, Sarah," he said with a fake smile. "I heard about your fire. That's too bad." "Yes, it is," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe now you'll reconsider my dad's offer," Jake said. "He might still be willing to buy your place, even after the fire." Sarah looked at him carefully. There was something in his eyes that told her everything she needed to know. He was not sorry about the fire. He was glad it had happened. "I'll think about it," Sarah said. Jake smiled wider. "Good. I knew you'd come to your senses eventually." Sarah drove home in silence. She was angry, but she was also scared. These people had destroyed her crop and might destroy more if she did not give them what they wanted. But giving up would mean losing everything her family had built. That night, Sarah sat on her porch and looked out at her blackened field. The smell of smoke still hung in the air. She thought about her parents and what they would want her to do. They had never backed down from a fight. They had taught her to stand up for herself and protect what was hers. Sarah made a decision. She would not sell the farm. She would not let the Morrison family win. Somehow, she would find a way to prove what they had done, and she would make them pay for destroying her life's work. The fire had taken her crop, but it had not taken her spirit. Sarah Mackenzie was not giving up. The real fight was just beginning. Sarah woke up to a strange orange glow coming through her bedroom window. At first, she thought it was the sunrise, but it was the middle of the night and the light was too bright and too close. She sat up in bed and looked outside. Her heart stopped. Her wheat field was on fire. Sarah jumped out of bed and ran outside in her pajamas and bare feet. The heat hit her face like a wall. Flames were dancing across her entire crop, turning months of hard work into ash and smoke. The fire was huge and growing bigger by the minute. She ran back inside and called the fire department. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. "There's a fire at the Mackenzie farm on County Road 15, she told the operator. "My whole field is burning." "We'll be right there," the woman said. "Stay away from the fire and wait for us outside." Sarah hung up and ran back outside. The flames were moving fast, eating up everything in their path. The wheat she had planted in the spring was almost ready for harvest. In just a few weeks, she would have cut it down and sold it. Now it was all being destroyed. She stood in her yard and watched helplessly as her future went up in smoke. The fire was so bright it lit up the whole night sky. She could hear it crackling and roaring like a living thing. The smell of burning wheat filled the air. Then she saw them. 3 dark shapes on motorcycles at the edge of her property. They were sitting there watching the fire burn. Even in the darkness, Sarah could tell who they were. She recognized the sound of Jake Morrison's motorcycle. It had a special exhaust pipe that made it louder than the others. The 3 boys sat there for a few more minutes watching her crop burn. Then they started their engines and rode away into the night. Their headlights disappeared down the dirt road that led back to town. Sarah wanted to run after them, but she was barefoot and they were already gone. Besides, she had to stay and deal with the fire. But she knew who had done this. She knew why they had done it. And she would never forget what she had seen. The fire trucks arrived 20 minutes later. By then, most of her crop was already destroyed. The firefighters worked hard to put out the flames, but there was not much they could save. Sarah stood in her yard and watched them spray water on the burning field. "How did this start?" asked the fire chief. His name was Bob Martinez, and Sarah had known him since she was little. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I woke up and saw the flames. Was anyone else around? Did you see any vehicles or people?" Sarah hesitated. She had Sue. Sarah waited 3 days for Sheriff Williams to come investigate the fire. When he finally showed up, he spent less than an hour looking around her burnt field. He was a big man with gray hair and a badge that seemed too small for his chest. Sarah had known him her whole life. He used to be friends with her father. "Well, Sarah," Sheriff Williams said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Looks like you had some bad luck here." "This wasn't bad luck," Sarah said. Someone set this fire on purpose. The sheriff looked at her with tired eyes. Now why would anyone want to do that? Sarah told him about seeing the 3 motorcycles that night. She told him about Jake Morrison and his friends harassing her. She told him about Mr. Morrison's offer to buy her farm and how angry he got when she refused. Sheriff Williams listened but did not write anything down. Sarah, I understand you're upset about losing your crop, but you can't go around accusing people without proof. I saw them, Sarah insisted. They were sitting right there watching my field burn. In the dark, from a distance, the sheriff said. That's not proof, that's just suspicion. Then investigate, Sarah said. Ask them where they were that night. Look at their motorcycles for evidence. Sheriff Williams shook his head. The Morrison family has been good to this town for many years. Jake Morrison Sr. employs half the people here. I can't go harassing his family based on the word of an upset teenager. Sarah felt her anger rising. So you're not going to do anything? I'll file a report, the sheriff said. But unless you have real evidence, there's nothing more I can do. After the sheriff left, Sarah called the state fire marshal's office. She thought maybe they would take her case more seriously. A woman named Detective Carol Hayes came out the next day. She was younger than Sheriff Williams and seemed more professional. Detective Hayes spent 2 hours examining the burnt field. She took pictures and collected samples of the soil. She asked Sarah many questions about what she had seen and heard. You said the fire started in 3 different places? Detective Hayes asked. Yes, Sarah said. I could see 3 separate areas burning when I first looked outside. That's consistent with arson, the detective said. Accidental fires usually start in one place and spread from there. Sarah felt hopeful for the first time since the fire. Finally, someone was taking her seriously, but Detective Hayes's final report was disappointing. While the evidence suggests this fire was set deliberately, she told Sarah over the phone, we don't have enough to identify who did it. Without witnesses or physical evidence linking specific people to the crime, we can't make arrests. What about the motorcycles I saw? Sarah asked. You said yourself it was dark and you were far away. A defense lawyer would tear that testimony apart in court. We need more than that to prosecute. Sarah's insurance adjuster came the following week. His name was Mr. Peterson, and he was not the friendly neighbor who helped with her harvest. This was a different Peterson, a thin man in a cheap suit who looked at everything with suspicious eyes. Mr. Peterson spent a whole day on Sarah's farm. He measured the burnt area and took photographs. He asked her the same questions over and over, again as if he was trying to catch her in a lie. Tell me again about your financial situation, Mr. Peterson said. Were you having trouble paying your bills? No more than any other farmer, Sarah said. I was waiting for harvest to pay off my loans. But you were behind on some payments? A little bit, but that's normal. Farmers always pay their big bills after harvest. Mr. Peterson wrote something in his notebook. And you had no other source of income? Sarah was getting frustrated. Where are you going with this? Just trying to understand all the facts, Mr. Peterson said. Sometimes people in financial trouble make desperate decisions. Sarah realized what he was suggesting. You think I burned my own crop? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just investigating all possibilities. 2 weeks later, Sarah got a letter from the insurance company. They were denying her claim. The letter said that while they could not prove she had set the fire herself, they also could not rule it out. Because of this uncertainty, they would not pay for her loss. Sarah read the letter 3 times before it sank in. Not only had someone destroyed her crop, but now she would get no money to replace it. She was facing financial ruin, and there was nothing she could do about it. She called a lawyer in the county seat. His name was David Park, and he specialized in farm law. Sarah drove an hour to meet with him in his small office above a hardware store. I've seen cases like this before, Mr. Park told her. Insurance companies hate paying for arson claims. They'll look for any excuse to deny them. But I didn't burn my own field, Sarah said. I believe you. But belief isn't enough in court. We would need solid evidence to win a lawsuit against the insurance company. What about the people who actually did it? Can't we sue them? Mr. Park leaned back in his chair. Same problem, Without proof that specific people set the fire, we have no case. And even if we could prove it, the Morrison family has expensive lawyers. They would drag the case out for years. Sarah left the lawyer's office feeling hopeless. The system that was supposed to protect her had failed completely. The sheriff would not investigate. The fire marshal could not find enough evidence. The insurance company would not pay. And the lawyers said she had no case. That evening, Sarah sat in her kitchen and looked at her bills. Without the money from her wheat crop, she could not pay her mortgage. She could not buy seed for next year's planting. She could not even afford to repair her equipment. The farm that had been in her family for 3 generations was slipping away. The phone rang, and Sarah answered it without looking at the caller ID. "Hello, Sarah," said a familiar voice. It was Mr. Morrison, Jake's father. "I heard about your troubles with the insurance company. What do you want?" Sarah asked. "To help you," Mr. Morrison said. "My offer to buy your farm is still on the table. In fact, given your current situation, I might be willing to pay a little more." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "You planned this, didn't you?" "I don't know what you mean," Mr. Morrison said. "I'm just a businessman making a fair offer to someone in need." "Your son and his friends burned my field. That's a serious accusation," Mr. Morrison said. His voice got colder. "I hope you're not planning to spread lies about my family." "It's not a lie. Without proof, it's just the desperate talk of someone who's about to lose everything. Think carefully about my offer, Sarah. It may be the only way you can pay your debts and start over somewhere else." After he hung up, Sarah sat in the dark for a long time. She understood now how the game was played. The Morrison family had all the power in this town. They had money, influence, and connections. They could burn her field and face no consequences. They could pressure the sheriff to look the other way. They could probably even influence the insurance company's decision. Sarah was just a 17-year-old girl with no family and no political connections. She was supposed to be an easy target. She was supposed to give up and sell her farm for whatever they offered. But as Sarah sat in her dark kitchen, surrounded by unpaid bills and broken dreams, she felt something hard and cold forming in her chest. It was not despair. It was determination. They had taken her crop, but they had not taken her spirit. They had denied her justice, but they had not broken her will. If the system would not help her, she would help herself. If the law could not touch the Morrison family, she would find another way. Sarah Mackenzie was not giving up. She was getting angry, and angry people were dangerous people. The real war was just beginning. Sarah woke up the morning after Mr. Morrison's phone call with a clear mind and a cold heart. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen. If the law would not help her, she would build her own case. If the system protected the Morrison family, she would find a way around the system. She wrote down everything she knew about Jake, Tommy, and Derek, their full names, their addresses, where they went to school, what they drove. She listed their habits and hangout spots. She drew a map of their daily routines. Sarah had learned to track animals as a child. Now she would track these boys like a hunter stalking prey. Her grandfather had taught her how to move through the woods without making noise, how to watch and wait for hours without being seen, how to follow tracks and read signs that others missed. He used to say that patience was a hunter's best weapon. Sarah was about to put those lessons to good use. She started that very morning. Instead of going to school, Sarah drove to town and parked where she could watch Jake's house. She brought binoculars and a thermos of coffee. She wore dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. To anyone passing by, she looked like someone waiting for a friend. Jake lived in a big house on the rich side of town. His motorcycle was parked in the driveway next to his father's expensive truck. Sarah watched and waited. At 8:30, Jake came out of the house and got on his bike. Sarah started her truck and followed him from a distance. Jake rode to the high school parking lot and met up with Tommy and Derek. The 3 boys stood by their motorcycles talking and laughing. Sarah parked across the street and watched them through her binoculars. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see their faces clearly. When the first bell rang, the boys went inside the school building. Sarah waited in her truck, She had brought sandwiches and snacks. She was prepared to stay all day if necessary. This was her job now, learning everything about these boys and their routines. At lunchtime, Jake, Tommy, and Derek came outside again. They sat at a picnic table behind the school and ate their lunches. Sarah moved her truck to get a better view. She watched them, talk and joke around. They looked like normal teenagers having fun. But Sarah knew what they really were. After school, the boys got on their motorcycles and rode to a place called Murphy's Garage on the edge of town. It was an old building where kids liked to hang out. Sarah parked down the road and walked closer on foot. She hid behind some trees and watched. The boys spent 2 hours at Murphy's Garage. Other teenagers came and went. They worked on their bikes and talked about girls and sports. Sarah took notes on everyone who showed up. She memorized license, plate numbers, and faces. She was building a picture of their world. When the boys finally left Murphy's Garage, Sarah followed them again. Jake and Derek went home, but Tommy stopped at a gas station. Sarah watched him buy energy drinks and snacks. She noticed that he always bought the same things. People were creatures of habit, and habits could be predicted. That night, Sarah went home and wrote down everything she had learned. Jake left his house at the same time every morning. The boys always met in the school parking lot before first period. They ate lunch at the same table every day. They went to Murphy's Garage every afternoon after school. Sarah also started learning about their families and friends. She looked up property records at the county courthouse. She read old newspaper articles about the Morrison family business. She studied their social media accounts and those of their friends. She was gathering intelligence like a spy. The second day of surveillance was similar to the first. Sarah followed the boys and watched their routines, but this time she noticed something new. After leaving Murphy's Garage, all 3 boys rode to a remote area outside town. They parked their motorcycles and walked into the woods. Sarah followed them on foot, staying far enough back that they could not see or hear her. Her grandfather's training served her well. She moved quietly through the trees, stepping carefully, to avoid breaking branches or rustling leaves. The boys walked to a clearing where someone had built a fire pit out of rocks. There were empty beer bottles scattered around and cigarette butts on the ground. This was obviously a place where they came to drink and smoke away from adult supervision. Sarah hid behind a large tree and watched them. Jake pulled out a 6-pack of beer from his backpack. Derek had cigarettes. Tommy had brought his phone and was showing the others something on the screen. They were all laughing and pointing at whatever was on the phone. Sarah wished she could get closer to see what they were looking at, but it was too risky. Instead, she memorized the location of their secret hangout. She noted the path they used to get there and the landmarks that would help her find it again. On the 3rd day, Sarah brought a small digital camera with a zoom lens. It had belonged to her father, who used it to take pictures of the farm for insurance purposes. Sarah hid in the same spot and took photos of the boys at their hangout. This time, she got lucky. Derek was showing his phone to the others again, and Sarah could see the screen through her camera's zoom lens. It looked like a video. The boys were laughing and pointing at it. Jake even rewound it to watch certain parts again. Sarah took as many photos as she could. She captured the boys' faces clearly. She got pictures of them drinking beer and smoking. She documented their illegal activities. But most importantly, she got photos of Derek's phone showing what looked like a video they had made. That evening, Sarah developed the photos in her father's old darkroom in the basement. She had learned how to do this when she was younger, helping her father with farm documentation. The pictures came out clear and sharp. Sarah studied the photos with a magnifying glass. In one image, she could make out part of the video on Derek's phone screen. It showed orange flames against a dark background. Sarah's heart started beating faster. Could this be a video of her field burning? She looked at more photos. In another image, she could see Jake pointing at the phone screen and laughing. His expression was not one of sympathy or concern. It was the look of someone enjoying a private joke, someone proud of what he had done. Sarah printed copies of the best photos and put them in a folder. This was evidence, but not the kind that would hold up in court. She needed more. She needed to get her hands on that video. Over the next week, Sarah continued her surveillance. She learned that the boys went to their secret hangout every day after school. They always brought Derek's phone and watched their video. They seemed to enjoy reliving whatever was on that recording. Sarah also learned their individual schedules. Jake had football practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tommy worked at his uncle's auto parts store on weekends. Derek helped his mother with grocery shopping every Saturday morning. She studied their personalities too. Jake was the leader, always making decisions for the group. Tommy was the follower, going along with whatever his older brother suggested. Derek was the one with the phone and seemed to be the group's technology expert. Sarah realized that Derek was the weak link. He was smaller than the others and seemed less confident. If she was going to get that video, Derek would be her target. She just had to figure out how to separate him from his phone. As Sarah planned her next move, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time since the fire, she was not helpless. She was not waiting for others to solve her problems. She was taking action. The boys thought they had gotten away with destroying her farm. They thought they were safe because their families had money and influence. They thought a teenage girl could not fight back against them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Sarah Mackenzie was no longer just a farm girl trying to survive. She had become a hunter, and they were her prey. The only question now was how to spring the trap. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks perfecting her plan. She had identified Derek as the weakest member of the group and the one most likely to have kept evidence of their crime. But getting to his phone would require careful timing and a lot of luck. She continued her daily surveillance, learning more about Derek's habits. Every Saturday morning, he drove his mother to Miller's grocery store and waited in the car while she shopped. He always brought his phone and played games while he waited. This would be Sarah's best chance to get close to him. On Saturday morning, Sarah positioned herself in the grocery store parking lot before Derek arrived. She wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, and she brought a shopping basket to blend in with other customers. When Derek's car pulled up, Sarah was ready. Derek parked near the front of the store and pulled out his phone as his mother went inside. Sarah watched from behind a parked truck. Derek was completely absorbed in his game, paying no attention to his surroundings. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Sarah walked casually toward Derek's car, pretending to look for her own vehicle. When she got close enough, she accidentally dropped her car keys near Derek's open window. As she bent down to pick them up, she quickly attached a small recording device under his car. The device was a voice-activated recorder that her father had used to document equipment problems. It was small and magnetic, designed to stick to metal surfaces. Sarah had modified it to record continuously for up to 8 hours. Derek never looked up from his phone. Sarah picked up her keys and walked away, her heart pounding. The first part of her plan was complete. Now she had to wait and see if the boys would say anything incriminating when they were alone in Derek's car. That afternoon, Sarah retrieved the recorder and took it home to listen. Most of the recording was just road noise and music from Derek's radio. But near the end, she heard voices. Derek had picked up Jake and Tommy, and they were talking about their plans for the evening. "Should we go to the spot again?" Tommy asked. "Yeah, I want to watch the video one more time," Jake said. "It never gets old." "Derek, make sure you bring your phone," Tommy added. "The video looks so much better on that big screen." Sarah's hands were shaking as she listened. They were definitely talking about a video, and it sounded like they watched it regularly at their secret hangout. This was more evidence, but she still needed to see the actual video to prove it showed her burning field. Sarah decided to take a bigger risk. The next day after school, she followed the boys to their hangout in the woods. But instead of watching from a distance, she planned to get much closer. She waited until they had been there for an hour, drinking beer and relaxing. Moving as quietly as a shadow, Sarah crept through the trees toward their clearing. She had brought a small digital audio recorder and planned to hide it near their fire pit. If she could record them talking about the fire, it would be powerful evidence. Sarah got within 20 feet of the boys before she found a good hiding spot behind a fallen log. She could see them clearly and hear every word they said. Derek had his phone out and was showing something to the others. "Watch this part again," Jake said, pointing at the screen. "Look how fast it spread." The fire department took forever to get there, Tommy added. We were long gone by then. I can't believe how bright it was, Derek said. It lit up the whole sky. Sarah's heart was racing. They were definitely talking about her fire. She turned on her audio recorder and held it as close to them as she dared. Play the part where she comes running out of the house, Jake said. She looks so scared. Derek rewound the video. Here it is. Look at her face when she realizes what's happening. All three boys started laughing. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. They had not only burned her field, but they had filmed her reaction to discovering it. They were treating her worst nightmare like entertainment. My dad was right, Jake continued. She's just a stupid girl trying to do a man's job. After this, she'll have to sell the farm. What if she doesn't? Tommy asked. Then we'll think of something else, Jake said. There are lots of ways to make life difficult for someone. Sarah recorded 15 more minutes of conversation before the boys finally left. They talked about other girls at school, their weekend plans, and their motorcycles. But they also made several more references to the fire and the video and getting rid of the farm girl. That night, Sarah listened to the recording over and over again. It was clear evidence that the boys had set her fire and filmed it. But she still needed to see the actual video to make her case complete. She had to find a way to get Derek's phone. Sarah spent the next few days watching Derek even more carefully. She learned that he always charged his phone in his locker during gym class. The locker room would be empty during that time, and Derek usually forgot to lock his locker properly. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah skipped her own gym class and hid in the school bathroom until the hallways were empty. Then she crept into the boys' locker room. Derek's locker was exactly where she expected it to be, and it was not locked. Derek's phone was plugged into a portable charger inside the locker. Sarah's hands were shaking as she picked it up. She had brought a small USB drive and planned to copy any videos she found. The phone was not password protected. Derek was careless about security, which made Sarah's job easier. She quickly found the video folder and saw dozens of files. Most were ordinary videos of friends and family, but one file was much larger than the others and had been created on the night of the fire. Sarah's heart stopped when she opened the video. It showed her wheat field burning in the darkness. The camera was shaky, obviously being held by someone on a motorcycle. She could hear the boys' voices over the engine noise. Look at it burn, Derek's voice said from behind the camera. This is awesome, Tommy shouted. She'll never be able to prove. We did this, Jake added. The video was 12 minutes long. It showed the fire spreading across Sarah's field and her running out of her house in her pajamas. It captured her horrified expression as she realized what was happening. The boys had filmed her worst moment and turned it into their entertainment. Sarah copied the video file to her USB drive, along with several other videos from that same week. She also took screenshots of the file information, which showed exactly when and where the video was created. Then she carefully put the phone back in Derek's locker and left the school. That evening, Sarah watched the stolen video on her computer. It was even worse than she had imagined. The boys had not just burned her field. They had planned it carefully, bringing a camera to record their crime. They had stayed to watch her discover the fire, laughing at her pain and fear. But now Sarah had them. The video was proof of arson. The voices on the recording clearly identified all three boys. The timestamp showed it was made on the night of her fire. This was the evidence she needed to destroy them. Sarah made multiple copies of the video and audio recordings. She put them on different USB drives and stored them in separate locations. She also printed out transcripts of the conversations she had recorded. She organized everything into a professional-looking case file. The next step was deciding what to do with the evidence. Sarah could turn it over to the police, but Sheriff Williams had already shown he would not help her. She could give it to the state fire marshal, but Detective Hayes had said she needed more than witness testimony. Sarah had an idea. She had read about the FBI investigating arson cases when they involved federal crimes. Burning a farm crop might qualify as agricultural terrorism or interstate commerce interference. The FBI would not be influenced by local politics or the Morrison family's money. Sarah also planned to use the evidence in civil court. Even if the boys avoided criminal charges, she could sue them for damages. With this video, no jury would doubt who had burned her field. But before she contacted any authorities, Sarah wanted to gather even more evidence. She wanted to know if the boys had committed other crimes. She wanted to document their pattern of harassment and intimidation. She wanted to build a case so strong that no lawyer or corrupt official could dismiss it. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction as she looked at her growing collection of evidence. The boys thought they were untouchable. They thought their families, money, and influence would protect them. They thought they could destroy her life without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Sarah Mackenzie was no longer just gathering evidence. She was preparing for war, and she intended to win. Sarah spent 3 more weeks building her case before she was ready to act. She had copied the arson video, recorded hours of incriminating conversations, and documented months of harassment. She had photographs, timestamps, and witness statements from other students who had seen the boys bothering her. Her evidence file was thick and thorough. But Sarah did not go to Sheriff Williams. She did not even go to Detective Hayes at the State Fire Marshal's office. Instead, she drove 2 hours to the federal building in Helena and asked to speak with the FBI. The receptionist at the FBI office looked surprised when Sarah walked in. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "I need to report a federal crime," Sarah said. "Agricultural terrorism and arson." The receptionist made a phone call, and 10 minutes later, a man in a dark suit came to meet Sarah. He introduced himself as Special Agent Michael Torres. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe in his 30s, with sharp eyes and a serious expression. "What can I do for you, Miss Mackenzie?" Agent Torres asked as he led Sarah to a small conference room. Sarah opened her file folder and placed a USB drive on the table. "3 boys burned my wheat field 2 months ago. I have video evidence of them committing the crime." Agent Torres raised an eyebrow. "Video evidence?" "They filmed themselves doing it," Sarah said. "They thought they would never get caught." Sarah played the video on Agent Torres's computer. She watched his expression change as he saw the boys laughing and joking while her field burned. She showed him the audio recordings of their conversations. She presented photographs, documents, and a detailed timeline of events. Agent Torres listened carefully and took notes. When Sarah finished her presentation, he leaned back in his chair. "This is impressive work," he said. "How did you gather all this evidence?" "I followed them and recorded them," Sarah said simply. "They weren't very careful about covering their tracks." "What about local law enforcement? Did you report this to them first?" Sarah told Agent Torres about Sheriff Williams refusing to investigate and the insurance company denying her claim. She explained how the Morrison family controlled the town and how normal channels of justice had failed her. "I see," Agent Torres said. "And you believe this qualifies as a federal crime because?" "Was an attack on agricultural production," Sarah said. "The boys destroyed my crop to force me to sell my farm. That's economic terrorism against a food producer." Agent Torres nodded. "Agricultural terrorism is indeed a federal crime. And if they used interstate communications to plan the attack or sell equipment across state lines, we might have additional charges." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "I'll need to verify your evidence and conduct my own investigation. If everything checks out, we'll make arrests. Federal arson charges carry serious penalties." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. Someone with real authority was going to hold the boys accountable for what they had done. "There's one more thing," Agent Torres said. "The boys don't know you have this evidence, do they?" "No," Sarah said. "They think they got away with it." "Good. Don't let them know what's coming. We'll need to move quickly once we start the operation." Agent Torres gave Sarah his business card and asked her to keep all her evidence safe. He said the FBI would begin surveillance of the boys within a week. They would verify Sarah's story and gather additional evidence before making arrests. Sarah drove home feeling better than she had in months. The FBI was going to investigate. The boys would finally face justice. Her parents would be proud of. how she had fought back against the people who tried to destroy their farm. But Sarah's satisfaction was short-lived. 2 days later, she received a phone call that changed everything. "Sarah," said a familiar voice. It was Derek Walsh, and he sounded scared. "I need to talk to you." "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "Not over the phone." "Can you meet me at Murphy's garage in an hour? Come alone." Sarah was suspicious, but she was also curious. Why would Derek want to meet with her? She decided to go, but she brought her audio recorder and told a neighbor where she was going. Derek was waiting for her in the parking lot when she arrived. He looked nervous and kept glancing around as if he expected someone to be watching them. "What's this about?" Sarah asked. "I know you took something from my phone," Derek said. Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The video of your fire," Derek said. "It's gone from my phone. You're the only person who could have taken it." Sarah thought quickly. If Derek knew about the missing video, he might have told Jake and Tommy. Her whole investigation could be compromised. "Even if I did take something," Sarah said carefully, "what are you going to do about it?" Derek looked around again, then stepped closer to Sarah. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said quietly. "I'm here to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "Jake knows you took the video. He's planning to do something about it, something bad." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of something?" "He wants to burn down your house," Derek said. "He thinks if you're homeless, you'll be too busy surviving to cause trouble for him." Sarah stared at Derek in shock. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I never wanted to burn your field in the first place," Derek said. "That was Jake's idea. I just went along with it because I was scared of him." "You filmed it," Sarah pointed out. "You laughed about it." Derek looked ashamed. "I know. I was trying to fit in with them. But when I think about what we did to you, it's not right." Sarah studied Derek's face. He seemed genuinely remorseful, but she did not trust him completely. This could be a trap designed to find out what evidence she had. "When is Jake planning to burn my house?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow night," Derek said. "He and Tommy are going to wait until you're asleep, then set fire to your porch. They think it will look like an electrical problem." Sarah felt her anger rising. These boys had already destroyed her crop and her financial future. Now they wanted to destroy her home and possibly kill her in the process. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked again. "Because I'm tired of being scared of Jake Morrison," Derek said. "I'm tired of doing terrible things just to stay in his good graces, and I'm tired of watching him destroy people's lives." Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I deleted the video from my phone, but I have backup copies. I'm willing to testify against Jake and Tommy if it means stopping them." Sarah realized that Derek was offering to be her ally. He was taking a huge risk by betraying Jake and Tommy. If they found out, they would make his life miserable. "What do you want in return?" Sarah asked. "Just promise me you'll stop Jake before he burns down your house," Derek said. "I can't live with that on my conscience." Sarah made a decision. "Meet me at the Federal Building in Helena tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Bring your backup copies of the video and any other evidence you have." Derek nodded. "Will the FBI protect me from Jake?" "They'll protect both of us," Sarah said. "Jake Morrison is about to learn that federal agents don't care about his daddy's money." As Derek drove away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. She was angry that Jake planned to escalate his attacks on her. She was worried about spending another night alone on the farm, but she was also excited that Derek was willing to testify against his former friends. Tomorrow, the FBI would have everything they needed to arrest Jake Morrison and Tommy Morrison. Tomorrow, Sarah's long fight for justice would finally reach its conclusion. But tonight, she had to stay alive. Sarah did not sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen with all the lights on and her father's hunting rifle across her lap. Every sound outside made her heart race. Every car that passed on the distant road could be Jake and Tommy coming to burn down her house. At midnight, she heard motorcycles in the distance. Sarah turned off all the lights and moved to a window where she could see her driveway. Two bikes were approaching slowly with their headlights off. She recognized the sound of Jake's modified exhaust pipe. The motorcycles stopped at the edge of her property. Sarah watched through her window as two dark figures got off the bikes and walked toward her house. They were carrying something that looked like gas cans. Sarah's hands were shaking as she picked up her phone and dialed 911. "There are two people with gasoline trying to burn down my house at the Mackenzie farm on County Road 15, she whispered. To the operator, "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Units are on the way." Sarah kept watching as Jake and Tommy approached her front porch. They were moving carefully, trying to stay quiet. Jake poured gasoline around the base of the porch while Tommy acted as a lookout. Sarah had her rifle ready, but she hoped she would not have to use it. She just needed to stay alive until the police arrived. She watched Jake pull out a lighter and prepare to ignite the gasoline. That's when the FBI vehicles came roaring up her driveway with their lights flashing. Agent Torres had been monitoring police radio frequencies and heard Sarah's 911 call. He and his team had been ready to move all night. Jake and Tommy tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Federal agents surrounded them within seconds. Sarah watched from her window as the boys who had terrorized her for months were forced to their knees and handcuffed. "Sarah, this is Agent Torres," came a voice through a megaphone. "You can come outside now. The area is secure." Sarah opened her front door and walked onto her porch. The smell of gasoline was strong in the air. If she had not been warned by Derek, her house would be burning right now. She might have died in the fire. "Are you all right?" Agent Torres asked, as he approached her. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "Thank you for getting here so fast." "We've been watching them all day," Agent Torres said. "Derek Walsh came to our office this morning with his evidence just like you said he would. We have everything we need to prosecute these boys for federal arson charges." Sarah looked at Jake Morrison as he sat in the back of an FBI car. His face was red with anger and humiliation. He was no longer the cocky teenager who thought his family's money made him untouchable. He was just a scared boy who had been caught committing serious crimes. Tommy was crying in another car. He kept asking for his parents and his lawyer. Sarah almost felt sorry for him. He had always been a follower, going along with his older brother's bad ideas. But he was old enough to know right from wrong, and he had made his choice. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "They'll be charged with federal arson, attempted arson, agricultural terrorism, and conspiracy," Agent Torres said. "These are serious felonies. They're looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison." "What about their father?" "Mr. Morrison tried to pressure me into selling my farm after the fire. We'll investigate that too. If he was involved in planning these crimes, he'll face charges as well." The next morning, news of the arrests spread throughout the county. People could not believe that Jake Morrison Jr. and his brother had been arrested by the FBI. The Morrison family was powerful and respected. How could their sons be federal criminals? The local newspaper ran the story on the front page with the headline, "Morrison's Sons Arrested for Farm Arson." The article included details about the video evidence and Derek Walsh's cooperation with federal authorities. Everyone in town was talking about it. Sheriff Williams held a press conference where he claimed his department had been cooperating with the FBI investigation all along. He did not mention that he had refused to investigate Sarah's original complaint. Agent Torres did not contradict him publicly, but Sarah knew the truth. Derek Walsh was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. He had to transfer to a different school because other students were angry at him for snitching on his friends. But Derek told Sarah he was relieved to be free from Jake's influence. "I should have stood up to him years ago," Derek said when they met at the courthouse. "I'm sorry it took so long for me to do the right thing." Sarah's insurance company suddenly became very cooperative once the arrests were made. They paid her full claim within 2 weeks, along with additional money for her legal expenses. The check was enough to cover her losses and pay for replanting her field. But the civil lawsuit Sarah filed against the Morrison family was even more rewarding. With the video evidence and the boys' criminal convictions, the case was settled out of court for a substantial amount. The Morrison family paid Sarah enough money to expand her farm and buy new equipment. Mr. Morrison tried to claim he knew nothing about his son's crimes, but the FBI investigation found evidence that he had encouraged their harassment of Sarah. He was charged with conspiracy and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. His ranch was forced to sell off land to pay legal bills and lawsuit settlements. Jake Morrison Jr. was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Tommy Morrison got 5 years. Both boys would be adults when they were released, and they would have federal felony records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. 3 years later, Sarah stood in her wheat field watching the harvest. The crop was bigger and better than any her family had ever grown. She had used the lawsuit money to buy modern equipment and expand her operation to 500 acres. The old farmhouse had been renovated and expanded. Sarah had hired 2 full-time workers to help with the farm operations. She was no longer alone and struggling to survive. She was a successful businesswoman with a bright future. Sarah thought about her parents as she watched the combine harvester cutting through the golden wheat. They would be proud of what she had accomplished. She had not only saved the family farm, but she had made it bigger and better than ever before. The people who tried to destroy her had only made her stronger. Jake Morrison thought he could burn down her crop and force her to give up. Instead, he had taught her that she was capable of fighting back against anyone who threatened her family's legacy. Sarah had learned to be patient like a hunter. She had gathered evidence like a detective. She had fought back like a warrior. She had proven that justice was possible. Even when the system seemed stacked against her, the wheat field that had been burned and destroyed was now more beautiful than ever. The farmhouse that had almost been burned down was now a modern home filled with life and hope. The young woman who had been seen as a helpless victim was now a powerful force in her community. Sarah Mackenzie had won more than just a legal victory. She had won her self-respect, her future, and her family's honor. The farm that had been in her family for 3 generations would now continue for many more generations to come. As the sun set over her golden fields, Sarah smiled and thought about tomorrow. There would be more work to do, more crops to plant, and more challenges to face. But she was ready for all of it. She had learned that she could overcome anything with patience, determination, and the courage to fight for what was right. The girl who had been bullied and terrorized was gone. In her place stood a woman who would never back down from a fight. Sarah Mackenzie had found her strength in the darkest moment of her life, and that strength would carry her forward forever.